Good morning, everybody. I'm Stuart Janney, and I'd like to welcome you to the Jockey Club nightclub. We're that masquerading as the 71st Roundtable Conference. Very pleased to, I'd like to say I'm very pleased to see all of you here, but in point of fact, it's pretty hard from this vantage point to see any of you. We've got a lot of things to cover today, and so I'm going to jump right into the agenda with Kristen Werner, who's the senior counsel of the Jockey Club and administrator of our Thoroughbred Incentive Program, who's going to discuss thoroughbred safety initiatives, which we all know are incredibly important to our sport. Following Kristen is Kyle McDonald, who became president and COO of Equibase this past spring, and he's going to share insights on Equibase eGPS, where it's leading horse racing. So without further ado, thank you, and Kristen and Kyle.
Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'll be giving a brief update on a few of the aftercare and racehorse safety initiatives of the Jockey Club. Though much progress has been made in the area of thoroughbred aftercare, we continue to see thoroughbreds at low-end auctions, in kill pens, and in cruelty and neglect situations. This population includes horses that do not enter the breeding or racing population, horses retired from racing, horses retired from breeding, and horses exiting the sport horse and recreational riding population. The Jockey Club is today announcing two projects. One is an update to the transfers retired from racing process, and the other addresses traceability of thoroughbreds. I will also share with you an update from the Jockey Club's Thoroughbred Safety Committee. First, I'm pleased to announce that the transferred as retired from racing process has gone digital. The permanent removal of a horse's eligibility to race is beneficial to the retiring racehorse, but the process requires thoughtfulness and transparency on the part of both the seller and the buyer to avoid contractual disputes or other disagreements. To that end, the previous process required a notarized signature and a hard copy form to retire a thoroughbred from racing. With the assistance of digital signature verification, we're now able to confidently collect the required signatures through Interactive Registration's website, which will make the process easier for everyone involved. Second, the replacement of hard copy certificates with digital certificates, beginning with the full crop of 2018, will allow the Jockey Club to follow up with the certificate manager to try to trace a thoroughbred that has exited the racing or breeding population with an unknown outcome. When this system is in place in 2024, an automated prompt will be triggered when a horse has no racing activity, no breeding activity, and no Thoroughbred Incentive Program number for a specified period of time. The communication will explain why the prompt was triggered and will ask the manager to indicate the horse's current status. When they have submitted the response, the certificate manager will be sent a message related to their selection, including how to transfer the digital certificate or complete the transfer as retired from racing process, or aftercare resources for those horses consigned to a non-racing auction or sale. In addition to collecting the data, the database will include a reporting function to monitor failures to reply and analyze the responses to assist with aftercare efforts. To complement the rollout of the digital certificate prompts, the Jockey Club will also reach out to the last racing connection of horses foaled in 2017 and prior that started in the past 10 years but have a current unknown status. The survey would not include current racing or breeding stock, horses with tip numbers, or horses with a known status in their first exit from racing, such as those who were exported or transferred. We would also try to identify and exclude those horses that went through a facility accredited by the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. Owners are reminded that they can, at any time and free of charge, update ownership information with the Jockey Club and through interactive registration, and should report deaths to the registry on a timely basis. Now for the Thoroughbred Safety Committee. This committee was created in May of 2008 to review every facet of equine health and to recommend actions the industry can take to improve the health and safety of thoroughbreds. We've been guided by the Equine Injury Database in identifying factors for horses at increased risk of fatal injury. Racetracks and regulatory veterinarians have implemented data-driven measures based on these risk factors to support horse-centric health and safety checks before and after a horse starts in a race. For many years, the Jockey Club's Encompass Solutions has supported these measures through databases, reports, and electronic flags at entry, and continues to support similar efforts through HISA's racetrack safety program. In 2022, data analysis from the 14th year of reporting to the equine injury database showed a decrease in the rate of fatal injury in 2022 to 1.25 fatalities per 1,000 starts. This is the lowest cumulative fatality rate since the EID was launched in 2009 and is the fourth consecutive year that the rate has decreased. While 99.88% of thoroughbred races were completed without a fatality last year, clusters like those that occurred in April and May of 2023 unfortunately cast a shadow over the good news and bring equine fatalities back into the headlines of the national media, reminding us that we cannot rest on our laurels when it comes to equine health and safety. Based on research using data contained in the equine injury database, we've been able to identify about 35% of risk factors for horses at increased risk of injury during the running of a race. These include vet list history, race distance, and time with the trainer, among others. Much of the remaining risk is unknown, in part because data is just not available to analyze aspects of horses' life outside of a race. The committee and the stewards have been studying this area extensively this summer, and with the horse at the forefront of our sport, we'll continue to look at ways to identify opportunities for thoughtful intervention and effective continuing education. Today, the committee is publishing a recommendation relating to racing surfaces and the dissemination of information regarding consistency and maintenance of the racing surface. The Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act includes requirements for monitoring racetracks. The Thoroughbred Safety Committee today calls for that information to be frequently measured at periodic distances and made available to the public. Working with other key industry stakeholders, especially the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority and the Racing Surfaces Testing Laboratory, the Jockey Club recommends exploring the best methods for providing the racing surface data to the horsemen and to the public, including through an app, a website, or another electronic feed. As with all of its recommendations, the Jockey Club will help provide resources to ensure that this recommendation is met. As always, you can find information on all of the Jockey Club's initiatives on our websites. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the morning program.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you this morning on my first roundtable conference. I joined Equibase on June 1st of this year, and while I'm new to the horse racing industry professionally, I come with extensive experience working across sports data, sports media, and sports betting. And I also have a long-standing interest in horse racing. And I plan to use what I've learned over the course of my career to help make racing more entertaining for the casual fan, more integrated with the ever-growing population of sports bettors in the United States, and foster a better understanding of the sport through data for the whole of the horse racing industry, including the use of data to enhance training and safety. I joined ESPN in 1997, where I led the development for the official websites of several of the major U.S. sports leagues and built relationships that have lasted throughout my career. I launched some of the first fantasy games, video content and subscription products, and data products for sports such as the NFL, the NBA, and college football. I also worked extensively with NASCAR, where we implemented the first electronic timing and scoring system and used that data to develop consumer products for digital and television graphics programs. Most recently, I headed U.S. partnerships for Sportradar, the leading company in the world when it comes to powering sports data collection and distribution for sports betting and integrity services. There, we monitored and collected data from over 90,000 sporting events every year across almost 100 different sports and served the vast majority of regulated sports betting operators across the world. In that role, I worked closely with the NBA and Hawkeye to develop a long-term partnership for optical tracking across the league. This included using the raw data collected to better define statistical categories like steals and blocks and be able to better utilize changes in ball rotation and individual players tracked down to the fingertip to help with replay reviews. But beyond officiating and automated collection of statistics, U.S. professional sports leagues are most interested in this data to enhance storytelling and drive more interest and ultimately increase television ratings and fan engagement, including wagering. These are the concepts we must consider as we think about how data can be used to grow our sport. As I've started getting to know the highly dedicated and experienced Equibase team, as well as our hardware and technology partners, I'm excited by both the current depth and the future potential of eGPS tracking. At tracks across the U.S. and Canada, I see a tremendous opportunity to build upon our existing infrastructure with emerging technologies that will unlock more data that we can make available to the fan, the handicapper, the media, and horsemen. With installations our team completed here at Saratoga at the beginning of this meet, we are now providing eGPS services at 28 tracks across the US and Canada. This represents over 75% of North American handle. We continue to work to expand that footprint. And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work of our track services team, who in many instances worked to complete installations on short notice to help support our partner racetracks. Given the size of these venues, the speed of the thoroughbreds, and the myriad of other variables at the racetrack, including wayward lawnmowers and lightning strikes, it's a much more difficult environment than most sports to collect data. While the positioning of a starting gate and turf rails often vary from race to race and day to day, home plate at an MLB game is always in the same place. It's not at the discretion of the umpire. Given those variables and some of the inherent limitations with GPS technology on its own, we are working on multiple fronts to refine our system by using a variety of different inputs. And by using multiple data inputs in concert, including wireless beam timing, wireless eyes, optical tracking, global positioning systems, and combining those with local positioning systems and our Equibase chart callers and track operations staff, we will be able to continue to increase the depth and quality of data that ultimately gets delivered. As an example of the technology we are exploring, here is a short clip that illustrates how we are working with our partners at Total Performance Data to refine our existing eGPS data with the use of machine learning and computer vision. What you're seeing here is not a user-facing product, but instead a new set of data created from existing cameras at the track to enhance and refine our own GPS data. This optical tracking will allow us to key in on individual silks, helmets, horses, saddle tail colors, and numbers to ensure the in-running order is properly displayed on screen and enable us to make corrections in real time, which can also better enable in-running wagering products and more advanced handicapping products. Additionally, we're continuing to invest in several areas to better visualize the data we collect, including new graphical representations of past performances to augment information that's traditionally been a part of our charts. We are experimenting with graphics generated by Total Performance Data that illustrate stride frequency and length averages for a given field, and they can be displayed at the track or in digital products. We have also worked with Pramana Labs this year to launch an artificial intelligence-powered product to deliver race insights to handicappers, and we've recently worked with FanDuel TV to supply in-race eGPS data for use on their broadcasts. We believe this is just the beginning of what we can accomplish. I look forward to working with all of Equibase's partners and customers as we work together to improve the depth and accuracy of data collection and leverage that data to grow the sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen and Kyle. Next, I'd like to introduce Lindsay Zarniak, an Emmy Award-winning sports broadcaster for Fox Sports. Lindsay is also an influencer with the Jockey Club's new fan development initiative, America's Best Racing. She's here to give us insights on sports marketing. Thank you.
Good morning. It is so awesome to be here, and I just wanted to say a quick thank you for having me here today. And it was really wonderful to meet a lot of you last night at the chairman's dinner. I'm just going to tell you this. I was so excited and / nervous. I don't know why, because I've heard about this for years, that I realized 10 minutes into that dinner, I had my pants on backwards. And I'm not kidding, and thank goodness they were really nice cream-colored slacks that you actually couldn't necessarily tell, but I know you're all nice, because nobody said anything, so I like you already. No, I'm kidding, but thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, to experience this. This is really serendipitous for me on many levels, so I'm excited to share for you guys why. But yes, I'm Lindsay Zarniak. I am a sportscaster, I am a content creator, a podcaster, I'm a mom, a wife, a daughter. My father, Chet Zarniak, who's covered horse racing for years, is here with me. My mom, Terry, is here. I think my kids may be in the back, so there they are. I'm gonna try not to embarrass them. But this is just such a great opportunity. I am also a thoroughbred owner with West Point Thoroughbreds by way of America's Best Racing's A Stake in Stardom campaign. And Terry Finley and Stephen Panis have given me a gift that I'm not gonna cry. I am a crier, but I'm not gonna cry. That I don't even know they realize how important this is to me and what it really means to me. I have covered an array of sports in my time at ESPN, Fox Sports, NBC. I have covered the NFL, NASCAR, Major League Baseball, the NBA, Olympics, but lately, because of how we now consume things, I have had people at major sporting events come up to me and say, "We love your jokes." And what they mean by that is my joke of the day, which I post on Instagram. And of course, I wasn't gonna come empty-handed, right? So my joke of the day today is, when does a horse talk? Only when he wants to. It's good, right? Thank you. You can clap. Come on. My kids approved it on the way downstairs, so thank you, Dell and Sibby. I appreciate that. I started doing the joke of the day, though, during the pandemic, and I did it because my thought was I can kind of do it like musicians do it and slide in 3 jokes in the midst of the homeschooling, and maybe it would like keep them entertained, keep the focus going. So my kids are 6 and 9, and they now give me their own material. They didn't like it in the beginning, but now they're actually really good at making these jokes, which is awesome. And by the way, I will happily take credit if anybody has one. I'm happy to post it. I'll include your name, so it's all good. And I know that that's light, but there is really a lesson in there. That's why I brought the joke. And the lesson is that we know people are on their phones all the time, right? And it really has shocked me the way that people come up to me and even know that that's something that I do. Consuming things has become so much more personal. We know that. People now follow what they like. They follow what makes them happy, what makes them feel good, what makes them excited, and what makes them hopeful. That could be showing them something behind the scenes, giving them access to something they didn't expect. It, of course, could be the drama of a down-to-the-wire finish and showing them what's so incredible about a story of the winning horse, any team, you name it. It could be winning money, right? Because that never gets old. I believe in sharing with our kids anything that we can to pique their curiosity. And I'm so excited to have my kids here this weekend because there are so many things to show them here, and I want them to become lifelong race fans too. But I have often said to my daughter recently, I want you to remember one phrase. Maybe she'll say it with me. Give the people what they want before they know they want it. Give the people what they want before they know they want it. I stole that from Steve Jobs, because I read his book a few years ago, and I loved it so much because to me that means it's all about growth and evolving. In other words, captivating the audience by showing fans what they don't even know they're missing. And I really, honestly believe this sport has the ability and the reach to offer that unlike any others. I have been a fan of horse racing since I was a kid. My dad, Chet Zarniak, moved, oh, there he is. There's me and Dad. That's at the Derby this year with Jace's Road. But my dad moved us from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to Virginia in 1982 so he could cover sports, specifically horse racing, for USA Today. So I grew up hearing all these stories. I would hear about the races when he came home. I would hear about the journalistic rush of tracking down a trainer for a story. I heard a lot about the time that he wrote a story from the perspective of a horse. So USA Today used to do a feature that they called Private Sides, and Private Sides were stories off the field of professional athletes. And my dad had the idea to do a story on Chief's Crown heading into the 1985 Derby. And so he tracked down the information and he wrote a private side on Chief's Crown, owned by Andrew Rosen, member of the Jockey Club. So my dad happens to be the only journalist, or the first journalist, sorry, Dad, who wrote a private side on a non-human for USA Today, which I think is pretty cool. So it's funny for us to make those connections. It wasn't until I started covering NASCAR, though, that we connected about one of our favorite characteristics of both of those sports, the magic of mornings at a racetrack. When America's Best Racing reached out to me to create content around Flightline for the Breeders' Cup, I did not tell them this, but I would have done it for free. Sorry, Steven. Honestly, and when they asked me to be a part of the Stake in Stardom program, I was equally excited because really what this campaign does is through different influencers like myself that touch different areas of sports, of lifestyle, of family, our respective audiences are able to learn and relate to those living that experience. And I believe sports is all about relatability. I have thought that for a really long time. I think that when you've got a fan who hasn't paid attention to a sport but is a potential fan, if they can relate to something in that sport or of a player or of a team, that's everything and that hooks them. And so what I wanted to do is bring people along on the ride. I have covered Super Bowls, NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals, World Series, but what I felt during my experience covering the Kentucky Derby, it was almost indescribable. So I want to share a clip of the moments from that meant so much to me. It is just, this is incredible. Look at all these people. It is Derby Day. We are here for the Kentucky Derby, and I am a co-minority owner of Jace's Road, who has a chance to win the Kentucky Derby.
I got one for you too.
How are you? Oh my gosh, welcome. How is Derby? We're at the Derby. What up? How are you?
That is awesome.
Thank you. I love your suit. Likewise. You pulled out the blue. Yes. Very good.
Tried to make it happen.
I know. This is just like you said. It's so amazing.
The best.
Oh my gosh, Terry Finley.
Welcome to the
All
Derby.
right, this is the best. How are
About ready to do the walkover. You ready?
I don't know. I think so. I'm so excited. Got to save the tears for the race, man. Save the tears for the race. But this is like, it's just, this is like raw emotion. Just blah.
In the Kentucky Derby. And Jace's Road has a very good beginning and goes out to the front. And they're into the stretch. And Two Phils has turned for home on top. And it is going to be Mage to win the Kentucky Derby.
I mean, I think it was incredible seeing them this close. I'm just, he tried hard. He tried hard.
Did his best. Was here. Just making it really cool. I'm happy.
I had an amazing time. 10 out of 10 would do again.
You know, you go into it and you're like, what if? And then you know the whole time that the odds are so stacked. Anyway, the horse ran a valiant effort, and it was still such an amazing experience, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I really think the what if factor of this sport is so palpable and so awesome, and there's so much opportunity there. So I took my dad to the Derby, and having the horse Jace's Road run in the Derby, that was an experience that we will remember forever, from everything that really symbolizes that magical Derby day to the walkover. I mean, that was incredible, being in the paddock before the race. So like I said, my goal is really, I've been thinking about it differently. It is to give people that pay attention to my stuff, my content, that credential or that VIP access that they really wouldn't have, because I can feel it. I can feel that that is where the people that respond to my things that I put up on social, that's what they're asking for basically in the interaction. And here is what I think could help horse racing better market and position itself in today's hyper-competitive sports and entertainment landscape. I think continue to lean into what you're already doing, which is storytelling and access. And if I'm thinking about things that do really well with engagement that I can share, an example of that is the Vikings come from behind win against the Panthers after being 33 points down. So I was on one of the sidelines for that game. Unfortunately, it was the Panthers, but the game was incredible. The Vikings came out after halftime last season and they just blew them out. scored 33 unanswered points, and I decided to shoot a video walking off that field, and I just shared what I was feeling. It was similar to what you just saw, and I was shocked because the amount of people that were responding and that were engaged. It was the live element, and it was the fact that they felt like they were there, right? It was similar to what I posted after the walkover at the Kentucky Derby. Beyond that, I think this is really important. The things that all of you think are pretty routine, just routine parts of your day, the barns awakening in the morning, the layers of people, the hard workers, and I mean the hot walkers, the vets, the grooms, the farriers, the trainers, the owners. That is fascinating to people out there. The stories behind them, but also what they do. Also, the responses I get that are like, they do what? Horseshoes, what? I know it sounds so simple, but it's true. It's just fascinating because people haven't seen it before if they haven't been following horse racing. It's vital also, that team camaraderie, so vital to the success or failure of a horse and a team's race. Also, the family aspect of horse racing, a necessary aspect. Also, the high stakes aspect of this sport that your average sports fan would consume. They're rabid for that kind of storytelling and content. I think the fact that Netflix is doing a documentary on this sport is a great thing. I think that it is one way that you can help invite fans into this arena. I think horse racing should place this sport every single place that you can target demo, where the demo consumes content, where your target demo lives. That means streaming platforms, podcasts like mine, digital, and social media. I think every single place that you can wallpaper it is what needs to happen, and lean into the game of it all, right? And horse racing does such a good job of that already, but really leaning into it, into the money. We've all seen how prevalent sports betting has become in football and other sports. I took my husband to the Belmont. My husband doesn't like to leave the house, right? He gets up so early that he just wants to stay home, but he was, interested, curious about going and checking out the Belmont. He hit a trifecta because he was helped by my dad and also Dan Torjman with ABR. So I had to show you this video because this is what I experienced when I look back at my husband.
What happened? You got the what?
Holy smokes!
Somebody rolling on there? How did you pick them?
Trifecta. My buddy Dan Torchman helped me. My old colleague and friend.
So, that's all it took. And he's now hooked. He's so excited. Dan Torjman can do no wrong now in our house. But that was just an awesome moment. And it was really, also, it was such a family moment for us. The whole family came with me, and that's an experience that people love and that they should have. You can relate the venues also, the majesty of Lambeau Field or Fenway, right? Or Churchill Downs or Saratoga. But in my opinion, what horse racing has to offer that the NFL or NASCAR or any other major league sports does not, it's the animals this sport's built around. And you've heard Kristen talking about it, everyone that's been up here talking about the ways that you're working to make the sport better, to evolve. I have heard a lot of NASCAR fans in my day covering that sport talk about following the sport because their dad was a fan of Chevy or Ford. Simple as that, right? Or they liked a certain sponsor because it was slapped on the side of a race car. Maybe they like Cheerios and they become the fan of that driver forever, right? They chose a driver to follow. The same can happen for a racehorse or a jockey or a compelling story of a trainer or an owner. The storytelling, bringing the audience in, but once you're there, keeping them there. We've seen the story of Cody's Wish running in the Whitney Stakes. My son won money on Cody's Wish because he bet on Cody's Wish at the Belmont. But that story has become something that so many people are rooting for that horse. It's incredible. One thing I have learned from covering different sports using social media is fans want authentic. That's the truth. They have so many options, so many places to go to get their content that they want to consume. There's very little patience for anything that doesn't seem real, that doesn't seem right, and they are quick to tell you, and they're quick to unfollow or whatever it is, right, with whatever platform. When I post about my journey at the races, there's no question I get an overwhelmingly positive response. People want to know more. They want to know who they should be rooting for. They want to know the things behind the scenes. But they also always inevitably will ask about the sport and say, how do you explain all of these horses getting injured? And the answer may not be obvious, but addressing the issue and having a consistent way that you address the issue, talking about the positive steps taken to not allow this to happen and showing people what the steps are taken on a daily basis to protect horses, to regulate illegal practices, that is key in my opinion. Because if people can see it, then they can understand it and they know in their minds what's fair, what's not fair. If a player suffers a concussion in the NFL, it's hard to watch. That is hard to watch. Or if something bad happens in any sport, there's no question. It's tough to swallow, and it brings up questions, always. But we know, because we can get the information about what the players are wearing when they take the field, that they are protected. It's their choice. Since horses don't have that choice, it's even more important that you're upfront and that you're sharing the lengths taken to protect them. I think now also people are hungry for that, and people are just genuinely curious and wanting to know more about this. So I think the timing right now is key, just as key as understanding how special and rare this horse racing community really is. There's no question in my mind that passage of the Horse Racing Safety and Integrity Act has been a monumental step in the right direction. Not only really to level the playing field, but even more critically, in my opinion, to establish clear-cut rules and regulations that everyone involved must adhere to. It goes a long way in convincing fans the horse does, in fact, like I was saying, come first, and that integrity is paramount. It's great to see the unprecedented support also of the industry for HISA, and I think that it's an indication of the sport's dedication to innovate, to evolve as one, and imagine if that collaboration continued into marketing. I think that there have been so many steps that are taken in the right direction, so I commend you for that as a sport. One thing lastly before I go, I want to make the connection about NASCAR. When I started covering sports, NASCAR and football, but more NASCAR at that time was really what I got into. And I did not know a lot. I found myself in a garage trying to make relationships and asking questions that I felt like were, oh, this is so idiotic, I should know this. But I didn't. I was new to the sport. And what I learned quickly was it was really all about the people and the relationships and the trust. And the trust went both ways. I had to trust that they were giving me the information that was accurate, because there were some jokesters in the garage, but I had to trust that they were understanding that I needed this information, that I was trying to build up my knowledge base in this sport. And they had to trust that I really didn't want to just show up and leave, but I really was interested, right? That I really cared about the sport. I wanted to be in that sport for a long time. I think this situation in horse racing right now is very similar. You need to trust the fan base. The fan base is hungry, right? And they're hungry for it. You have to trust that the information that you're going to share with them and the transparency that you're going to show isn't going to be shot back in your face, right? But I think the fan base also needs to be able to trust that they're getting the information. And from that information, they can decide what's fair and what's not. And I believe what they will see is that this sport is tremendous and that there are great ways that people are going to those lengths to take care of the most critical piece, which is the horse, but also all the connections that are around it. So I want to thank the Jockey Club, America's Best Racing, West Point Thoroughbreds for the opportunity to speak with you today. I hope that you know that you guys have a lifelong race fan in me, one that truly believes this sport has so much to offer generations and sports fans to come. And again, if you have a joke, lindsayzarniak@gmail.com. I'll make sure to give you credit. But thank you guys so much. This has been so wonderful, and I can't wait to experience this weekend.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was a wonderful presentation. Computer-assisted wagering is a complex issue in our sport. Pat Cummings of the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation is joining us as moderator of a panel with Professor Marshall Graham of Rhodes College and NYRA executive Joe Longo. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, and greatly appreciate the invitation to be here with you today. At the 1974 Roundtable, horse racing's greatest advantage was addressed in the opening remarks of then Monmouth President Phil Island. Horse racing, Island said, quote, is not just a spectator sport, but rather one in which the fan participates on a high level. The horse a fan bets on belongs in some small measure to the bettor by virtue of the bet. I think Lindsay captured that pretty well as well. Today, the competitive landscape for wagering is far different, but the connection between racing and its fans, the bettors, is fierce. The history of wagering on U.S. racing is one filled with stops, starts, and seemingly endless change. But it all really got kicked off when Leonard Jerome imported 4 pari-mutuel ticket machines from France at his Jerome Park in 1871. America got its first taste of pari-mutuel wagering. The minimum bet, $5, the equivalent of about $125 today. So keep that in mind the next dime superfecta you put in. Pari-mutuel wagering took hold in the 1930s as it became clear the guaranteed percentage of takeout from each bet was an economic driver for all involved. By the 1970s, off-track betting was launched in New York, and the simulcasting era was truly underway. Congress passed the Interstate Horse Racing Act in 1978, facilitating simulcasting's growth. Truly landmark legislation at the time, though it did face some fierce resistance from many in the sport at that time. Racing was an industry confronting transition, and in 1983, just 1 month after this multi-day piece from Steve Christ in the New York Times, a New York legislative task force sought to address this period of change. Its chairman, Senator John Dunn, asserted, quote, if we can't bring more people to the track, then we must bring the tracks to the people. Distribution of track signals expanded and eventually would reach Americans directly in their homes and not just the Keeneland Sales Pavilion, as it was here in 1987. On-track betting actually has plummeted across those intervening years. It was cut in half from 1/4 of total handle to 1/8 of total handle across 7 years, from 1996 to 2003. In 2001, the 4 largest online wagering providers at the time handled just $50 million. In 2 years, it grew 10 times that, to more than $500 million. But concurrent with the rise of internet account wagering for ordinary horse players was the growth of a segment of bettors leveraging this new connectivity. These customers are often referred to as CAWs, computer-assisted wagerers or wagering. The CAWs are individuals with well-resourced staffs. They develop couture models to assess vast amounts of data. They deploy finely honed algorithms to efficiently place bets, often at the last possible second, and all while receiving significant rebates for their play. In pari-mutuel wagering, betting late has always been beneficial. But when all betting was done on track, betting late came with a significant risk, the chance you might not get your bet down at all. That's not a concern now, especially for the CAWs, who've been given the ability to place batch bets, dumping vast amounts in the final cycle of betting, and the impact of that is witnessed every day in nearly every race and across almost every pool. While total wagering from CAWs has grown significantly in recent years, wagering from all other customers has not. Here are the numbers. In 2003, CAWs were roughly 8% of total handle, but last year, probably about 1/3 of all betting on U.S. thoroughbred racing. When you adjust these figures for inflation, the concern becomes quite obvious. Handle from all non-CAW customers is down by nearly 2/3 in just 2 decades. The greatest source of growth has been a handful of high-frequency bettors. So how the evolution of CAWs is managed and how we support our existing customers might be key to the future of wagering on racing in today's tech-forward world, one with unfathomable processing power, machine learning, AI, and more. To discuss this evolution in much greater detail, please join me in welcoming our panelists, Joe Longo and Dr. Marshall Graham. So, Marshall, one of the most interesting people I know in the sport, and I've been involved for probably 20 years or so, an owner, a breeder, an academic researcher, and a very serious horse player. So if you could, just give us a little overview of your entire involvement in racing.
Well, I've kept track of every bet I've ever made. I remember in 1991, I made my first bet on a thoroughbred racehorse, Quailwood Swap. I drove up to Pimlico, made a bet, won it 7-2. 2010 was a big year for me. I bet 49 grand that year. I got 52,000 back. I made $3,000. I also owned my first racehorse. I claimed a horse for $5,000 at Philadelphia Park. So suddenly I was an owner and I was a winning horse player. I was on top of the world. In 2011, I got rebates for the first time. It allowed me to be a winning player. By 2015, I had bet $25 million in 1 year. So it was a 500-fold increase with a betting partner, increase in handle from me as a result of having an opportunity to win and the pricing being different. And I went from one racehorse to now I own 113 racehorses in partnership or outright. I own 60 in training with 12 different trainers. Many of those trainers have less than 30 horses. I have 21 broodmares, and I stand a stallion just down the road at Irish Hill Century Farm.
So that's a pretty significant change. Yeah, I think so. But it all started with betting.
All started with betting. And now, again, we're talking about computer-assisted wagering. I do some computer-assisted wagering. I have a model. My partner and I have a model. We use that model to calculate probabilities based on historical data, based on real-time odds. We take those probabilities, we turn them into bets, and we bet at the last minute. And we go right through the front end. So a lot of the teams that you read about, right, they have their own TRA codes, they have direct access to the tote system, but there are a lot of people out there that can do computer betting right through the front end. So in part, this is not going away. We need to figure out how to make this work for every player.
So from the operator side, Joe is sitting in today for David O'Rourke, and we appreciate you coming on kind of at last minute notice, Joe. You are the general manager of NYRA's content management services business. For those that are here that don't necessarily understand or aren't familiar with that title and how it fits under NYRA, could you just walk us through that for a minute?
Yep, so we started NYRA Content Management Solutions about 5-6 years ago with the idea of effectively becoming a content agent. We're not the first in that space, there are some others. And what we look to do is increase distribution and get fair market rates for the tracks that we represent. So we started out with 8, we're up to 15 now, so I like to joke that in addition to Tony Alivato, my boss, I have 15 other bosses. So it's it's been quite a ride the last couple of years.
So we'll get into more of some of the things NYRA has done and truly a real leader in the computer-assisted wagering management over time. And I think it's also worth noting that a few years ago, the New York Racing Association did become a minority owner in the betting services provider called Elite Turf Club, which works directly with a lot of the CAW teams. So we'll weave that in a minute here. But Marshall, in the last 5 to 10 years, you said 2015, you were handling $25 million a year. What has changed since then? What have you witnessed from a betting standpoint? How has it affected your business and your operation of your model and your wagering in this really modern way?
Well, the market's become much more efficient. And so not only as a result of the computer teams and the sophisticated bettors, the professional bettors, but we've also lost many casual players to sports betting, to casinos. The proliferation of low-price alternatives has pushed people out of our wagering pools. And so the increase in efficiency, right, has hurt a lot of mid-level horse players. We'll probably end up betting only $7.5 million this year. It's become a lot tougher. The space is a lot tougher. We're always updating our models, but so are the teams, right? These are always works in progress. It's not like they turn on their computers and models and it just goes. It takes updating, it takes work, and the markets become more efficient. The prices become more accurate reflections of a horse's true chance of winning. For the everyday horse player, we've seen a lot more odds movements. Now, these odds movements, these late price movements, are something not new. In fact, in 2002, the industry took a real good look at odds movements. In fact, Churchill Downs and some other tracks went to cutting off pools at 0 minutes to post. But we still see that now, and it's very frustrating, especially to new horse players used to sports betting, used to fixed odds, to bet a horse at 4-1 and see it go off at 8-5, or to bet a horse and think they're getting $22 in the exacta, they're getting $12 in the exacta. And our middle market player, our player who's a weekend warrior and bets a significant amount of money, I talk to many of them and they're betting a lot less. And so they're getting squeezed out as a result of the shark eat shark environment. And so it's a lot tougher. It's a lot tougher for all players.
Joe, let's kind of talk specifically about what NYRA's done in this arena. 2 years ago, NYRA made the decision and was public right around this time 2 years ago and said that they were going to cut off the CAW players from betting in the win pool inside of 2 minutes to post. They then subsequently did this, cut out the CAWs from betting in the late pick 5 across NYRA's tracks. You eliminated the jackpot pick 6 provision, changed some of that. What was NYRA seeing in the lead up to that? What caused you to look at the investment from bettors across many different segments and say, we're going to step in and make some changes here and really be the first in American racing to do that?
So similar to what Marshall said, we had a lot of complaints from customers and even people in the industry specific to the win pool itself and the late odds drops. And knowing that it is an efficient market, we simply turned around and said, look, we can't have the late odds drops any longer, the last minute money into the pool. So we let them wager into the pool up until 3 minutes to post. So come 2 minutes, they're not allowed in the pools any longer. And what you've seen now is that because there is no CAW effectively in the win pool at all, you are seeing, payouts that when you're comparing to the other pools that they are in, substantially higher. As it relates to the other pools that they're not in, there's several, our pick 6 that we have, which is traditional. We eliminated the jackpot. Late pick 5 has always been retail only, but it's similar to, at least in our view, and we have the liquidity to do it. So I understand that not all can, but running different spreads of poker. And you could play a 2-4 limit, or you could play a 5-10 no limit. So in our point of view, there's nothing wrong with having some of these pools that the everyday retail player can participate in and hopefully have a good result at the end. I think also on the win pool side of things, fixed odds and that stuff, and I think we touch on that later. It is legal in some states and could be here sooner than we know, but in order to protect the pari-mutuel markets here, if the reason you're going to move from pari-mutuel to fixed odds is the volatility, we then remove the volatility from the win pool. Long term, this is something that's going to benefit us. So we've seen the win pool itself, the percentage of our handle prior to the restriction is the same exact number it is after, which more retail people have moved in there. So it's been a very positive, up until this point, and the end result too is a net decrease in the percentage of CAW in the pools.
Now, some other tracks in America have made some slight changes to the way in which they rebate their players. And rebates are not, it's not a 4-letter word, right? It is a way to incentivize your biggest customers, just like you would get a discount if you were buying something wholesale. But no one in the landscape of wagering on American racing has made the move that NYRA has. Do you think that it might be something we see, considering that the results have been pretty positive?
I do, and to be clear, there are some of the bigger tracks and entities that are exploring different ways to curtail this and change. I think as an industry as a whole, if we can come up with one industry-wide CAW policy, whether it's win pool or any other pool, and allow customers to know that you can bet with confidence, it eliminates that whole idea of the boogeyman in the room. And you can bet and expect what you're going to bet is what you're going to get. So I think that's something, know that we're working on that in the backgrounds. Hopefully we can see more about that in the next couple months.
Marshall, we hear algorithms, machine learning. It feels sometimes it's not just the regular horse player going to the track and cracking open the program and spending 10 minutes and having a bet. This is really modern. This is data, science, evolution, and modernity. I think a lot of times the CAWs get a bit of a bad rap as taking advantage of the system. Really, they're just taking advantage of modern technology. So it's not as if CAW play itself is bad, is that it has some effects that affect ordinary horse players.
Well, it's the evolution of the betting product, right? So I do think it's important what you said about rebates aren't necessarily bad. When I had my 500-fold increase in handle resulted in a 500-fold increase in contribution to tracks and purses. That margin, right, those rebates, they came from a reduction in what I was paying to the ADW, right? So when I bet $50,000 a year at ubet.com, right, maybe they kept 12% of what I bet, so they made $6,000. When I bet $25 million a year, right, that resulted in the ADW keeping $500,000. So you had this massive increase in what I contributed to purses, plus my ADW is better off, so it's this win-win. And so, what we see with these CAWs, right, and what we saw with me as a horse player is that people are price sensitive, right? And if we give people good pricing, they can play more. If we allow people to be winning players, the amount that they play might be exponential. But it's also important to note that there's no turning back, right? The computers aren't going away. We can't step back in time unless you this winter I went to Sam Houston Park, and that sort of was like it because everyone was cut off. But that's not our solution, right? That wouldn't work, right? So there's no stepping back. I bet right through the front of my ADW. So we log in, we bet, we make sure we hit the site to stay logged in, but we go straight through the front end. We have no special back-end tote access. And so people are able to do that. Our future horse player is very tech savvy. I teach a course at Rhodes College, the Economics of Racetrack Wagering Markets, which is effectively handicapping horses in the guise of there's decision making in economics and finance and psychology. But the kids who I teach, many of them have a programming background. They're interested in betting on the races, and they have found some constraints in doing it, and so they end up modeling golf, for example, and betting golf. But this is our future, giving people the tools to do computer-assisted wagering, helping out current horse players bet more efficiently is, I think, the way to go, because the competition is fierce, and there's no walking back from it.
Let's talk about the infrastructure itself. So you are limited as a bettor using an ADW, a mainstream ADW. You can upload files to place bets. You're limited as to how many bets you can get in per second. So if you wanted to play yesterday's pick six, for example, at NYRA, had a $180,000 carryover and generated almost $1 million in new money. If you wanted to play, say, 2,000 bets in that using your program, how long would that take you to get those bets in?
Well, I'm not good at quick math, but it takes 3 bets per second, right? So if you even made a simple Excel file and uploaded your pick six, right, you'd have to wait for all those bets to process. The teams can do that with rapid speed. So, again, I would be for eliminating those differences, right? I think all players should have the fast throughput. Now, this sort of brings us to the problem with the pari-mutuel system, right? When Pierre Auler, a perfumer in Paris, invented the pari-mutuel system, it wasn't intended that people would be using that information at the last minute to make bets, right? So the odds movements, which NYRA has worked hard and some other tracks are working on to solve, is problematic, and that's the thing I think that we're going to have to solve, because there's the teams, what they need is they need the public's information too, right? They need those odds. That's part of their models, and they're using those odds to bet late, and that's what's changing the odds. The teams are good in the win pool. They're exceptional in more complicated wagers. Pick fours, pick fives, trifectas, superfectas. So we need tools to help casual players bet those wagers more efficiently. We also need to steer newcomers into wagers that they can win and churn their money. Oaklawn Park, my home track just 3 hours away from Memphis, Tennessee, they have a 10% show wager. So that is appealing to a newcomer to the game. It allows them to churn some money, cash a few tickets, learn a little bit more before they jump into more complicated wagers. In fact, I find myself, when I go to Oaklawn Park, I may bet $1,000 on the races like I normally would, and may churn $2,000 for the show pool playing a show parlay.
All because of the pricing.
All because of the pricing, right? All because of the pricing. Again, it's on track. My money's going to Oaklawn Park and the Horsemen. I'm not playing through my ADW because I'm getting such a good price. And so on-track incentives like that can help the track, can help the Horsemen, and can help these new players, right, stay in the game longer, learn more about our sport, right, potentially learn more about handicapping, get more competitive. I do think that we need more winners, right? And I know it's a zero-sum game, right? But if we lower prices, people have more winning days. And as they have more winning days, they become more invested in our sport. They learn more about our sport. The great defenders of our sport are horse players, right? As a horse player, it was always my dream to own a racehorse. As a result of being a horse player, I now own a lot of them, right? And any horse player I know, they're great defenders of our sport. We need more fans, and those fans can be drawn to us through the betting window.
Joe, we've talked about kind of the evolution of pari-mutuel wagering, but as you alluded to, there is a tremendous amount of growth in other forms of betting that are driving sports bettors all across America, and it's only going to get bigger. Fixed odds wagering is very popular in other parts of the world. There's a start to it here in America with what's going on in New Jersey, but where do we stand, or what do you see as the future of fixed odds becoming a little more widespread in an era where, as we've said here, late price changes can be tough to tolerate for ordinary horse players. And in fixed odds, the price you bet is going to be the price you get. Where do you think New York is in that path, and really the greater industry?
We've been on record in New York saying it's something that we do want to participate in, and hopefully we get there. We'll see what happens just in terms of that. But it's important too for us to collectively, as an industry, to look at this bigger picture, right, and have control around it in general, because I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that fixed odds coming into the States is not going to potentially cannibalize what we're doing pari-mutually. How big of an effect it has is yet to be seen, but to the effect that we can control it from the start, make sure that it's successful, I think it would be a good thing and supplement what we're doing here. But I think we're kidding ourselves with the expansion of sports betting around the world, and even more so in the US here, that it will take off. And there's no reason to not think that it wouldn't, particularly with prop bets and everything else that could be used as an angle to get more casual folks into the game. I mean, you see what we're doing in New York here with the television strategy, and that's a perfect avenue for that casual sports customer and entry point into the pari-mutuel pools at some point. For us, our biggest strengths that we have are the exotic pools. So to that extent, do we have it, fixed odds in the win pool only, and use as an avenue pari-mutually for the exotics, which you see are one of our biggest things.
So from an economic perspective, to offer an alternative to complement wagering, Marshall, do you think that the introduction of, say, derivative products like a head-to-head matchup bet could not necessarily cannibalize the traditional win pool, but create new markets that could generate an increase overall?
I do. I love the pari-mutuel system. I think it's the best way to conduct gambling. The late odds movements are the problems with it. But the great thing is that in the superfecta and trifecta and these multi-leg wagers, they don't matter as much. The problem with fixed odds are what it does to winning players, but I think it's something that we have to try. I'd love to see an exchange market through our tote system that is well priced. I think an exchange system can allow for a fixed odds betting. The computers teams would love it because they would get to help set the market, and I think horse players would love it because they would get a fixed price. And so, to me, that would be a win-win if we could make it work, like in the nascent days of Betfair. It hasn't taken off in New Jersey. The market, I think, is a little small, but I think that's something. And again, I like your idea of, maybe the win pool is one that we can experiment with, and then these other pools, which are very large, aren't going to change. But again, right now, I still love the pari-mutuel system.
Joe, do you think we could get to a point where maybe more pools get limited for the CAW play, to the place and show pool, something like that? Do you think there's an evolution there to maybe expand that experiment a little bit more?
You know, I'd say it's, at least from my perspective, and we'll see what happens, but I think it's really all on the table. You know, it's in our mission statement as stewards of the industry here in New York. We have to make sure the thoroughbred industry thrives. And a major critical part of that is the player. So doing whatever we can to make sure that they're, you know, on level playing fields in terms of even developing tools and everything else that we can for them, it's something that we have to do. So for sure, it's all on the table for us.
Well, that wraps up our time. I really appreciate it. On behalf of Joe and Marshall, thanks to Stuart, Janney, and thank you.
Good. Gentlemen, thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. We're going to have a 10-minute intermission now, so we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. We're back in session. The Jockey Club has been a strong supporter of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. Today, a year after implementation of HISA's racetrack safety program, and a few months after implementation of the anti-doping medication control program, we're going to hear from HISA regulators and those affected by it. So welcome to this panel, and I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Gagliano with the Jockey Club. I'm going to moderate today's program. To my left is Ben Mosier, the Executive Director of the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit. Thank you for being here today, Ben.
Thank you.
Jenna Antonucci, Belmont Stakes winning trainer. Let's give her a hand. Jenna, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Ron Moquette, prominent thoroughbred trainer in his own right, has joined us today. And Lisa Lazarus of HISA. So we're going to start off with some pretty general questions. Let's go to the trainers first. Jenna, I'm going to ask you. As trainers, what's it been like for you to work under HISA regulations? What's changed? How has your life changed, and how have you dealt with it?
Well, how my life has changed with HISA would be very different than the racing. But for us, we were very blessed and very fortunate. How I run my business has always been pretty detailed. I think, you know, success is in the details. So from a record-keeping perspective, you know, we've been on the TLOR system for many, many years, and my team knows, my assistant knows that anything we do with the horses has been documented. And so I think that's probably been the biggest shift for a lot of people, is having to put those details in and have it in black and white instead of just having it in your head or in a condition, your training charts rather. And so for us, we've heard the struggles that others have had with implementing what some of that record keeping looks like, but our philosophies have always been a bit more preventative maintenance with horses and preventative health care for the horses, and not last minute things. So really paying attention to, as things are implemented with withdrawal times and days, making sure that we are adhering to that and paying a little extra attention to those details.
Great, thank you. Ron, for you, how's it affected you in your business? You run a large stable in multiple states.
Well, luckily, the business has prepared me by constantly evolving. So as a thoroughbred trainer, there's a new set of rules to follow, and we're going to adapt to those rules, but primarily it's all the same. We keep we keep the priority on the horse, and try to do the very best to stay within the guidelines, and to be aware of the changes that's going on around us and the newer expectations.
Has it been a challenge for you, specifically since May 22nd, when the anti-doping and medication control regulations came into place?
There's a few parts of it that's been very challenging. I would say that you're dealing with a large group of people that are maybe just now getting introduced to technology. Yeah. And so I may be on the younger scale of that, although I don't feel that young. But I'm helping people that are sometimes my competitors understand what now is being expected, yeah, and trying to help them, kind of navigate the new system.
That's great, thank you. Lisa, I'm going to turn to you. Can you explain for our audience the ADMC program's appeals process and how it makes sure that rule followers aren't getting unfairly punished?
Sure. I mean, I think I probably want to start by saying, like, one of the things that we heard a lot during the rulemaking process was, the public thinks that if a trainer has a medication overage, that we're doping, that we're a cheater, and they don't understand the difference between like true doping substances and medications that are allowed in racing, but just not on race day. And so one of the things that the program does is it very clearly delineates between controlled medications, which are those therapeutics that are allowed outside of race day, and the banned substances, which are theoretically the doping substances. And under the controlled medication violations, it is quite similar to what would previously take place, in that there's an opportunity to essentially appeal to a panel. It's called our IAP panel. It's predominantly filled with stewards from different jurisdictions. You would have your case heard by a steward from a jurisdiction outside of where that race took place. And then ultimately you have the right to appeal to the Federal Trade Commission and then a federal administrative law judge. Under the banned doping, which is a different category of substances, there is a provisional suspension that's put in place. If you have more than one horse with the same banned substance, otherwise you have the right to request the B sample and wait for it to come back. If the B sample comes back and confirms the A, then the official suspension goes into effect. But from the get-go, you have the opportunity to communicate with HIWU and provide any information that is exculpatory. You have an immediate right to a provisional suspension hearing, which would be limited to whether or not the suspension should be lifted during the pendency of the process. I think the key thing is that the provisional suspensions are not in place as a finding of guilt. There's always the presumption of innocence, but it's about sort of risk aversion. So if there's a serious substance that's in a horse, the philosophy of the program is that we're there to protect, the 99% of trainers that are competing cleanly. We want to make sure that they get a fair race, and we're there to protect the industry as a whole. And the risk is too high to allow those horses to continue to race during this period.
That's great. Ben, tell us a little bit about the HIWU drug testing process. What do you want horsemen to know about the system that you put in place? You and your team.
Yeah, I think we've built a great team of experts that come from a lot of different industries, including the horse racing industry, but also with science backgrounds, with investigations and FBI backgrounds, with human anti-doping and strategy backgrounds. And so we're using all the experience that we have as a team to apply these new rules into this industry. We learn a lot every day. We try to make sure that we're listening to those who have challenges with the rules, educate those, inform those, and trying to make ourselves available for all these new processes. That in general, the process probably looks the same in a lot of ways for those of you looking from the outside in when it comes to catching a urine sample, collecting a blood sample, still conducting a strong amount of post-race testing, but some new things with a strong focus on now a nationwide out-of-competition testing, which is informed through now our nationwide intelligence gathering. So strong partnerships with racing commissions, tracks, and the horsemen to make sure that all that information is filtered into one centralized location and apply that information on our testing plan. That's one of the biggest changes.
A couple follow-ups. Tell us about your team. You mentioned it's a team that's got some experience. Just describe for us, I've heard some comments about the team. Tell us about them, please.
Sure, yeah. Many names that a lot of people know, such as Dr. Mary Scoley, Alexa Rabbit, who's here with me today, and our communications director, and you've probably received many things about what we're doing from her. But also, to carve out our executive team, we have Michelle Pujols, who was former Assistant General Counsel for the NBA and started the NBA drug testing program in the 90s and managed that all the way up until about 2018. And then we have Kate Middlestad, who's our Chief of Operations, and many of those have met Kate. And she was the second employee ever at USADA, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, and helped form that entity from what it was when it started in 1999. So we've put together just a tremendous team. I'm so proud of what we've been able to accomplish in a short amount of time.
It's fair to say it's a pretty experienced team. How about on the investigative side?
Yeah, investigations is very important, led by our two directors of investigations. We have Sean Richards, formerly with the FBI, and as many know, was part of the big cases on the East Coast recently. And then we have Sean Lower, who comes from the CHRB, was their director of investigations for many years. So it brings a difference in strategy. You have the FBI, the law enforcement side, and then you have the individual who has worked with racing commissions and knows how to liaise with commissions. And you know, the whole mindset here, the goal of the program is to utilize as much of the industry that already existed before, with whether it's investigations coming from racing commissions or even the sample collection personnel that conduct the testing at tracks across the nation.
That's great, thank you. Jenna, you were very positive about some of the early months here of HISA and how it's impacted you. What advice would you give to HISA, to the board, to the management team of things that you'd like to see next?
I think the biggest thing, and actually Lisa and I have had some great dialogue about this, is you take an industry that has been applied trade for decades and decades and has been passed on from generation to generation, and people learn it by doing it. And we are now laying in this entire protocol that is very technical, and it's very overwhelming, it can be very intimidating. And I think we need to continue to work on making it more understandable, more relatable. And you know, I know the marketing team's done a great job.
Describe that further. Understandable, relatable. Give me a couple examples.
In the sense of, you know, people may not understand what due process means. People may not understand what provisional suspensions mean. And you know, I think media gets excited about putting a headline out, and now all of a sudden you have trainers. I mean, we are the ultimate insurer. Everything that happens in our barn, it falls on us, period. And it can be an innocent person walking in the barn wanting to touch a horse because they haven't. And they have touched something that is a banned substance or that is a controlled substance. And now we are at risk. And so we become a headline because that's what sells, is people having clickbait. And now, you know, you worry about having your reputation, that you have done everything we possibly can to do it the right way. And there's always going to be the outlier in any industry that is nefarious and makes bad decisions or is looking for an edge. But on the whole, every single person that goes out into the racetrack every single day wants the best for their team, for their horses, for the safety, and for the long-term prosperity of this industry. And so continuing to make this more understandable and more relatable on a simple term of, you know, the Lasix explanation went out not long ago, that how horses can still use Lasix and how they can't use Lasix in terms that are more comfortable, and continuing to be, you know, I'm very, if there's a problem, come with me to a solution. Don't just complain about it. And so I very clearly hear and understand how fellow trainers are very uncomfortable with it and want to talk about everything that's wrong with it. We all know that there's shortcomings in any change, but with every possible complaint that there is, continue to come forward with what you feel the solutions are. Ron's available, I'm available, the entire teams are available and have been asking and jumping up and down for, give us the solution to what your concern is, and as long as that accessibility is there, I think we'll continue to evolve through this change productively.
Thank you. Ron, same question for you.
Well, my job is, because I'm a man of many hats. I train horses, I own horses, I am a member of the HPBA, and I'm on the HISA advisory committee. So I'm constantly the soundboard. If there's a problem and someone from the industry doesn't have the number to Lisa and they say this is unfair, this is impossible to do, then they tell me and I tell them. And you know, I see that we're in an evolution stage. there's no question. It's new. It's coming around. They're gonna be problems, and we're gonna have to listen to horsemen, understand that regulators regulate. Horsemen have to follow through with these, and it doesn't matter, how good she is at her job or he is at his job. We need people like us, and we need the Bill Motts and the Steve Asmussens. My job is to say, look, I understand what you're trying to do, but this isn't applicable, or this goal isn't reachable. We need to manage expectations of things. We need to do a better job of explaining to people what the differences are between a accidental contamination and an overage of a permissible medication and someone attempting to gain a competitive edge. And they all shouldn't be treated the same. So I'm constantly the sounding board to go, look, you can't do this, you have to do that. And I'm basically representing 4,500 people that have to go through every regulation that HISA believes is okay. And sometimes we don't agree. So she and I'll get together, we'll battle, and usually come to I will say that, HISA's got to outrun being the new bully in the room to the people that have to deal with it. And it is increased workload with no more money. So they're having to figure out, how do we make somebody happy and do our job? And, I will say that Lisa has been very good about listening to my complaints, and we don't get along that great all the time. But I will say that she always hears me out, and she understands I speak for a large group, not just me. And we've generally, at least somewhat, come to an understanding that there needs to be more work done.
So before I ask Lisa to respond to the trainer's comments, what's the best way for horsemen to be communicated with, in your view? There is this massive amount of information that has been conveyed and developed by HISA and HIWU, and it's come on to trainers. In your view, Ron, what's the best way for them to consume that information?
We've had this discussion. One of the things that you got to understand is that, raise a hand. Everybody here today that cleaned a stall. I don't see a lot of hands. We're constantly in our realm, so get it to us. Not very many people are on Twitter. Not very many people check their emails, so you have to get it to them. Come to the barn, talk to them, hear what Bill Mott says, hear what Steve Asmussen says, concerns, a way to make it right. And I think if you go to the tracks and you understand that they are having to deal with a lot of stress, a lot of time constraints, and they will listen to you, and they're very capable of learning.
Well, being a trainer is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job, so that is unusual in a lot of industries. So your point's taken. Lisa, in response to Jenna and Ron's comments?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I'm so grateful, and I think Ben would share the same sentiment, to any trainer, owner, any participant in the sport that reaches out to us and gives us feedback. That is always welcome, and it's sort of part of what we have to do. What we're doing is we're taking international best-in-class standards around anti-doping, and we're trying to make them workable in a horse racing setting. And every sport is unique, and horse racing is certainly unique. And there are a lot of nuances that have to be considered, massaged, altered. And one of the things I always say is I am never ashamed about changing something or modifying something. I think that is, the ultimate in what we have to all do together. This is a brand new system. You can say there's always been anti-doping testing, and there's always been safety rules. Of course there have been. But to make them national, and to make them uniform, and to try to decide whether or not something that works in Indiana is going to also work in Kentucky, is going to also work in New York, Florida. Those are challenging questions, right? And I think from where we sit, we very much want to get it right. We care about the industry. Our only goal is to do right by the majority of the industry. And so we're not going to always get that right. But we need to what we're going to do is we're going to sort of adjust and modify and to some extent have to take in the information as things roll out. And one of the things I just want to say quickly is that the other thing about the program that I think is really important for people to know is that it is truly designed to weed out accidental contaminations and things that trainers can't control. Now, we may not always achieve that, but that's the intention and the goal. And so we do have an atypical findings policy where we have 27 substances that if a horse tests positive, it goes through a different process. And if it is in fact contamination, this is obviously under Ben's supervision, then the case never comes to light. And because of that, folks don't know about them, but we've already had a number of those positives, I think something like 8 or so, that are being dealt with entirely separately. So, and I think we also have, through our chief of science and through our science teams, responsible screening limits, et cetera. So the intention is not, it truly isn't to catch somebody who made a silly mistake or that, if somebody walked into the barn and touched a horse. I mean, our program shouldn't catch that stuff, and because we understand it. And if there's something that you can't possibly control, we don't want to regulate it. We're there to try to get the elements of the sport that truly are hurting all of us out of the sport.
Thank you. If I can, I echo Lisa's sentiments on what our goals are. And our goals aren't to catch those that are just making unintentional errors. And I'm so happy to hear you two talk about how we can continue to educate, outreach, inform the horsemen of these new rules and brainstorm different ideas to do that. And I hope my staff's listening, because this is a constant discussion every week that we have on how do we reach everyone to make sure that you're not making unintentional errors. And so we need input in order to achieve that. And that's so important to work together on that.
Productive input.
Correct.
So Ben, you come to us, to this sport from other sports. What's been your experience? What's the biggest difference between other sports and this sport? We just described, Ron described how trainers, it's 24/7. How was it, you worked in golf, you worked in other sports. Give us some thoughts on the difference that you experienced.
Catching urine from a horse is a little different.
Are you a good whistler?
I can whistle. I've practiced, but I have not done that actual part of it yet. So, to me, I think about what a lot of the professional sports and specifically the Olympic sports have gone through on the unification of rules, and it is very similar to what this industry is going through on unifying all the jurisdictions.
So when those sports began a new regulatory scheme, a more rigid regulatory scheme, did you feel some similarities to today?
Absolutely. I've had a lot of individuals looking from the outside in, from the anti-doping community, the human anti-doping community, say that it's like deja vu listening to what is happening with HISA now being applied across the nation, because the World Anti-Doping Agency did the same thing with over 200 countries in 1999, and look at where they are now. They of course had their bumps along the way, but trying to unify that many countries in a way is very similar to what's going on now.
So 24 years later for WADA, how are those sports industries? Are they, do they have the same questions and
absolutely
anxieties?
Absolutely. Every year you hear about the same things we're talking about now, ensuring that the regulators and the athletes are working together to continue to evolve the rules and make sure that those rules apply realistically to each one of those sports. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve here as well.
Great. So I'm going to ask the trainers one last question, and then I'll ask Lisa to close for us. But in the trainers, in your opinion, are there any specific rules or measures that appear that under HISA, and since the legislation was passed, that appear to be having the greatest positive impact on thoroughbred racing and yourselves? Jen, I'll ask you first.
I may be a minority in this thought, but I find it has been the great equalizer. And
how so?
Let's see. Let's walk into this bee's nest. It isn't a secret that there's different availability at different levels. And so
availability
of different pharmaceuticals, different really smart chemists, people looking to gain edge that you guys have worked so hard to try and neutralize. So I feel the biggest benefit has been to the probably the hardest hit of this industry, which is the middle and the smaller and middle size, where I think it has allowed a level playing field, and where that guy or gal that busts their butt 7 days a week, 24/7, can walk into a race not feeling like they're going to watch another horse re-break at the head of the stretch, that their applied trade and their skill set will have the opportunity to shine, where that 8% trainer historically, where it looks like I can't train a racehorse, all of a sudden, wow, she's winning more, or he's winning more. And it's not because we've done anything different in our practice, it's just that we've been able to walk forward now and know that, you know what I do darn well. And my opportunity and my horse's opportunity to come forward, whether it's an amazing opportunity of a Grade 1 Belmont Stake or a 12-5 maiden, is going to have the opportunity to march down that stretch and compete eye to eye with the horse that's next to them. And there's not a pharmaceutical in our way.
That's powerful. Thank you. Ron, same question for you.
Well, I think that anything that puts focus on the horse is a positive. I don't think that our industry was without regulation before HISA. I believe that we were always one of the most regulated sports in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that the increase of the scrutiny is obviously gonna come into play positively for the animal. We hope that everyone is playing fair. We know that we've got some people that at every level that are looking to weed out the very, very, very small percentage of those that may risk an animal and or try to gain a competitive edge. Now, what I want out of this is I want horsemanship to not be not be an afterthought. I want horsemanship to be applauded, not replaced with a regulation. And I want to continue to see the sport that I love and sacrificed my life for to grow and keep the horse first. I believe that regulations are necessary, and I believe that it should be on everybody's mind, but you're not going to regulate your way out of this mess that we're in with perception, public perception, and we're going to have to use common sense horsemanship applied with smart regulations. And I think that you're going to see you're going to gradually see a big increase of people outside the industry respecting what we're doing.
Lisa's shared with me how productive your participation has been in that regard, and I think
there's really nothing ever going to be perfect. That's the thing that I tell people. I'm wearing two hats. I'm on the HISA committee, and I'm also a HPBA member. HPBA members, we are representation. Mm-hmm. And so my job is to add a little friction and to say, well, that's goofy. Why are we doing that? Why can't we do it this way? And for the most part, I am met with at least discussion, and that's all we want to see at the table.
That's great. So Lisa, you've heard some great comments here. I'm going to ask you to wrap it up with thoughts that you have from this panel.
So I think, we all heard what Jenna said, and that's obviously the ideal, that's the goal, that's the mission, right? I mean, that's the only thing that we're in place to do, which is to protect the industry and to make sure that, those that are racing clean have a level playing field. But we've got to marry that with the issues that Ron raised, which is that not getting rid of horsemanship. And the magic is in finding that balance. And I think, we've just started off on this journey. I mean, it's not even 3 months. You said a few months. It was May 22nd that we launched the anti-doping medication control program. So we're learning from that experience, and we know what our goals are. And over time, and especially with, good dialogue with trainers like Jenna and Ron, we're going to get the feedback, I think, that we need to fine tune and to ultimately be able to have that perfect balance between, the clear objectives of protecting the industry, of having a level playing field, but not forgetting the essence of horse racing, and what trainers bring to the table. And I think that's where we really have got to do better,
Well, thank you. I want to ask the audience to give a round of applause to this great panel. I think it was very productive. And we'll throw it back to Chairman Janney for the rest of the program. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you. It was great.
Thank you. I agree. That was a wonderful discussion. Thank you to the panel. Our final speaker this morning is Mike Lopez. As a former statistics professor right here at Skidmore College, Mike is not a stranger to this area. Today, Mike is the Director of Football Data and Analytics for the NFL, and he's going to discuss how analytics can benefit the sport of horse racing. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Stuart. It's interesting, you flip through the program and you see all these successful trainers and bettors, and I mean, Lindsay's husband even won a trifecta. Doesn't show that my Naira account is at 66 cents. Last March, in a meeting with the NFL's competition committee, I was tasked with explaining somewhat of a niche adjustment to the punt play. Specific suggestion dealt with where punts would be placed after touchbacks. It was one of the ideas that our data group had come up with. I had 4 or 5 minutes to make the case why this would benefit the NFL through competitiveness, health and safety impact, and make it easier on our officials. When I was done, I turned it over to the chairman, Rich McKay, to add anything, and he said, "Well, committee, what do we think?" There was kind of an awkward pause, and I was anxious to hear the committee's response, because again, this was our idea. Everyone was looking around at one another. Titans coach Mike Vrabel broke the silence, and he said, "Well, this is not the worst idea I've ever heard of." So here I am, purveyor of ideas that will not be the worst out there. On that note, thanks to the Jockey Club for the invitation to come here and talk analytics. This spot is one I've been before. Like Stuart said, I taught up the road at Skidmore, but also in thinking about how analytical tools can help decision makers in sports. My job at the NFL League office is pretty awesome. Use data to enhance the game. Football has long been my passion. I grew up the son of a longtime high school football coach, played collegiately as well. You can have hobbies, and for the last decade, I count horse racing as one of mine. As Saratoga residents, my wife and I had summer passes to the track. We'd pick out shaded picnic tables along the walking path with a pink tablecloth and bet the 8-horse because it had a pink saddle. My oldest daughter's name is Lila, and that's relevant because our biggest score came on the Labor Day finale back in 2016. Brad Cox had a filly named Sassy Little Lila. I thought I was done for the season betting, but of course Lila's a real name and I'm a pushover. So here we were at the track on the final race of the season. Sassy Little Lila won, and the exacta paid a couple $100, and the Lopez family had a new favorite horse. So with football as my passion and horse racing as a moderately expensive hobby, my goal today is to share some of the ways the NFL is using data and analytics to make better decisions. Before starting into that, a little bit of background might help. Football and horse racing are pretty similar in that for years, the data of the sport did not change much. In the NFL, that means about 150 rows of data, one for each play. So for example, in the 70s, you'd have Terry Bradshaw threw a deep pass to Lynn Swann for a touchdown. In 2010, you'd have Tom Brady threw a pass to Rob Gronkowski for a touchdown. So you knew that Bradshaw or Brady threw the pass, and you knew that Gronkowski or Lynn Swann caught it, but you didn't know much more than that. To be honest, on a lot of times, you didn't even know the other 20 players on the field. So for me, as an offensive lineman, that was kind of a pain in the neck. I would play 75 plays in a game perfectly, and the only time I'd show up is if I recovered a fumble. Without much to glean from box scores, coaches would rely on film. They'd watch film before practice, they'd watch film after practice. They'd watch film of themselves, film of their opponents, film of themselves last year against their opponents. From that film, they'd collect loads of charting data, nearly identical to how horse racers would watch video or collect things at the track. They chart who was on the field, formations, tendencies, splits, personnel evaluations, you name it, they were writing it down. When scouting players, every scout would give a player on grades on things like stamina, or change of direction, or a player's closing speed. And when they'd run practice, they'd have someone running the scout team that would draw lines about where each player would go. So you'd have an assistant coach that had to take an expo marker and write down what the opposing team was going to do. When the sport started changing and we got more data, the core of scouting and the core of player evaluation has remained somewhat consistent. Coaches are still asking the same questions they were decades ago. But here's the big change, is that we're no longer limited to the same data. The biggest jump came in around 2015 when the NFL took a big step towards modernizing how teams and the league itself can operate via next-gen stats player tracking. Each player is now equipped with a pair of RFID tags, they're roughly the shape of your thumbnail, that fit in each of their right and left shoulder pads. That chip turns on when they walk onto the practice or game field and emits their location, their speed, their direction, and orientation at 10 frames per second. So as a rough estimate, when we have about 150 rows of data for 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s games, we're now closer to somewhere around 300,000 for each player in a game. So it's a big difference in terms of the size and the scope of what we're able to learn. But what we're trying to do is still the same. That metric that the scout would give for player stamina, well, you can get that using the player tracking. Change of direction, yep, we're going to measure that too. Same with closing speed. The tendencies for your opponents that used to have the coach write down with an Exco marker, most clubs have automated that process and will print out hundreds of plays in a matter of minutes. So the goals of the coaches and the scouts are the same, but they're now able to do things faster and at scale, in large part due to this new data. That data created new opportunity. I'm pretty sure it is the reason I have a job. When the league realized that everybody else was going to be using this tracking data, they wanted somebody to analyze it as well. When I started in 2018, we kept a spreadsheet of all the data science analytics staffers on NFL team staffs. There were somewhere around 60 or 65 at that point. That was 5 years ago. That list is now up to 140. So in roughly 5 years, NFL teams have doubled their investment in folks that have backgrounds like myself. Titles like Director of Football Analytics, Senior Data Scientists are now routinely popping up on NFL teams. At the league office, it helps change how decisions are made. I'll share a few examples. Our most important area of work comes with dealing with the competition committee. Whenever a rules process comes up and we're analyzing a new rule, our group spends some time analyzing many of the factors involved in that decision. We'll start with competitiveness. What is the competitive impact of this rule? How will it impact scoring? Will our game stay close? Will it impact the way that the teams have a chance of making the playoffs in terms of keeping all teams alive? Next is officiating. Can we come up with a rule that our officials can officiate? One of the quotes that the NFL likes to use is that we don't have a rule book for each official. We don't have a rule book for a Thursday game. We have an NFL rule book that is equivalent across all games. And last year when we were sharing some of our officiating data, we had some official-specific plots that we put up there and maybe suggested that some officials had certain tendencies. And it was a little bit more information than we were used to sharing, and Coach Tomlin of the Steelers responded, man, none of this shit's new to us. We know this is going on already. So again, kind of just sharing stuff that I think people are always asking about, but now we're putting numbers to it. Next is health and safety. What will be the impact of this play on player health and safety, both short and long term? Pace of play is another factor that we'll analyze. In other words, what is the way that we have a 3-hour and 5-minute game now? If we come up with this rule change, maybe we'll have more time on replay, and maybe that will have a negative impact. Last two would be simplicity and tradition. Can we get fans to understand what we're doing, and how will that impact the long-term tendencies of the league? One example of how we've used these patterns is the NFL's overtime format, which for most folks that are familiar with football is something that you will probably have an opinion on. 2 years ago, there was a rules change that dealt with whether or not both teams would possess the ball, and how we balanced it was these 6 levers. And when people ask me what is my favorite overtime, I tell them I don't have a right answer. The right answer depends on these 6 things. If you want to prioritize competitiveness, that's going to be one answer. If you want to prioritize health and safety, that's going to be another one. And so depending on how you adjust each of those levers will lead you to the right solution on overtime. Said committee chairman Rich McKay of our research, we now have really good discussion. And when I say in the old days, maybe that was even just 10 years ago, we'd have less statistics, no analytics, and we probably would have just watched tape. Today's environment, you get so much more information, and it gives you a better understanding of what the issue truly is. Whatever horse racing's priorities are, close races, safety of the horses and jockeys, the time in between races, etc., analytics will help address all of those problems. On top of those old questions, there are new ones to ask and answer. One large data investment area for the league office over the last decade has been in player health and safety. All NFL player injuries are, as part of the collective bargaining agreement with the NFLPA, tracked and monitored by a third party that's employed by the league office. Each club trainer enters every NFL player injury, and that allows for an independent voice to analyze the impact of rules changes, equipment modifications, and changes to the game. It's not simply counting pulled hamstrings and sprained ankles. It's also about establishing tools to make better decisions in the future. At each practice, each club is required to wear tracking devices that give insight into a player's load, their distance traveled, their speed, which allows sports scientists to evaluate performance, identify if players need to tone it down, or if a player is at heightened risk of injury. And more importantly, they're required to share that information with a third party, independent of the league, to analyze. More recently, all NFL players are also wearing those same chips that were in their shoulder pads. They're now in their helmets, and they're now in their cleats. The burden is heavy. This data is messy and the tracking cumbersome. But the idea of a cleat specific to a running back on turf or a helmet specific to a quarterback who likes to scramble gives the league plenty to work on for the future. Another area where the league is improving is in the replay process. The 2022 NFL season had both the fewest replay reviews and time spent on replay in over 2 decades. Most people probably wouldn't know that because most people don't really love when replay happens. But for us, it's important that the game moves fast and that we don't spend a lot of time wondering what the decision makers are thinking. Our group hand times every replay. So we can talk about fancy data, but at the end of the day, we literally have a guy or gal with a stopwatch that is hand timing the ins and outs of every replay process. We want to ensure that, for the sake of competitive equity, a replay initiated on a coach's challenge in Los Angeles on a Thursday night primetime game is identical to made at 1 o'clock game at Tennessee. The horse racing corollary is obvious. When, how, and why stewards decide for or against a disqualification should be identical at Del Mar as it is in Saratoga. Again, questions that are always asked, but often tried to put numbers to. This data revolution that has come for baseball, basketball, and soccer eventually came to football. If you can't tell, and based on Kyle's comments earlier, it's coming for horse racing too. That should excite you. The questions that you've always wondered, always asked as you make decisions, are ones now that you can answer perhaps more quickly. What horses have the most stamina? What is the best drafting style? What horses close the best? What is the optimal amount of rest in between races? What is the effect when you ship a horse east, west, or overseas? What are the optimal training timelines to avoid injury and maximize performance? Blinkers on or off? And I listened to a few too many horse racing podcasts. What does it actually mean when a horse gallops out? While it's an exciting time for sports analytics, not everything is fun and games. First, tracking data is, pardon the expression, a pain in the butt. That 160 rows of play-by-play data that football started with could fit in an Excel sheet across a couple seasons. At 300 rows for player tracking data, you might be okay with a laptop, but once you get to full seasons, you probably would need a server or something like that. And for folks that know Microsoft Excel, it's no longer useful. There are 2 popular and free coding softwares called R and Python, and if you're interested in data science, you'll know what those 2 are. Those are all but necessities at this point as folks try to analyze these hurdles of data. On top of those software, you also need servers to store the data and engineers to help extract and transform it. You also need time. The typical workflow isn't go find me the wide receiver that has the fastest change of direction. It's 1, how do you quantify a change of direction? 2, how do you write the code to do that on a single player on a single play? And then 3, once you have that, you still need to write the code to figure out how to do that on all players on all plays. More data also means more problems. One of the most exciting aspects of tracking data is that whenever you try and answer a question, you are likely the very first person to ever do that exact question. There is no textbook, there's no right answer. That, of course, is the scariest, and it also makes it easy to screw up. Of course, it makes the insights all the more valuable. I'll close with my favorite use of analytical tools to grow the sport. Each fall, our group runs a data science competition called the Big Data Bowl. You can see it pictured here. I believe we have the same club DJ operating our Big Data Bowl as the one is doing today's event. As part of this competition, we release data to the public, shared for free on a public website. This is data that the NFL could monetize, but they're choosing not to. If you remember the Field of Dream quote, "If you build it, they will come," the sports data science corollary is obvious. If you share it, they will analyze it. There's a really good example from 2020 where our group was tasked with trying to predict the number of yards that a running back would gain on a running play. So you can see here Leonard Fournette gets the ball against the Packers in the NFC title game. The question is, given the amount available to Fournette, what would we expect him to gain on the play? I have a group of 4 or 5 master's level data scientists, and I have a PhD in statistics. We couldn't figure this out. That is, when we would look at a play, we knew it was wrong. Right? We would come up with a prediction at 2 yards, and we'd show it to a coach and be like, no, that's not the right number. Right? Or we'd come up with 10 yards and be like, no, that's also not the right number. right? So we weren't able to come up with it ourselves. The NFL actually employed 2 different vendors to try and solve that same question. That is, we knew this was an important metric that we would be able to put on air. We knew fans and coaches would be interested in it, but we weren't good enough to it. So, like I said, if we share it, they will analyze it. As part of the 2020 competition that we had, we opened up this data, we shared the player tracking data, and we challenged data scientists around the world, you try and come up with a better algorithm than what we did. And they did. The winning algorithm for this competition was created by a pair of Austrian data scientists who literally had never watched football. That is, a metric that you see on air that came from our competition was done and finalized and written into production by our team, but it was created by people who didn't watch football and actually applied concepts from physics and chemistry into their algorithm. In this past year's competition, a husband and wife team co-authored a paper together. So we're bringing football fans together, but we're also bringing marriages together. That's even cooler when you find out that that couple had 3 young kids. And as somebody who came to Saratoga this weekend with 3 young kids, I empathize. This couple was also not football fans before. They finished as one of our 8 finalists, and they're from Japan. Our participants and the folks interested in analyzing football data or horse racing data aren't just US, they're all over the globe, which means that we're helping grow our fan base simply by putting our data out there and asking interesting questions. This competition has grown into the preeminent hiring pipeline in sports. Roughly 40 participants have been hired by NFL teams or vendors from this competition, and roughly half of the NFL's 32 teams have been hired. So on top of creating new metrics for fans, we're growing the infrastructure available to our group, in this case our teams, our owners, for them to do their own analysis. High school and college students can now go online to identify new football trends, make new charts, and follow their favorite athletes. And to the point that was made earlier about the connection with horses, this allows you to do that as well. Thanks to Joe Applebaum and NYRA, horse racing went down this track last year with the Big Data Derby, an exciting sign of things to come. I'd certainly encourage more versions of similar competitions and more reach for the inevitable data influx that's coming to horse racing. NFL football looks like it always has. The scouts are still grading stamina and change of direction, and coaches are still trying to come up with plays to scout their opponents on. But our stats and understanding of the game and the use of data has never been better and higher. Horse racing will get there soon. The thrill of Jace's Road or Arcangelo or Sassy Little Lila crossing the finish line won't change, but perhaps we'll know a little bit more about how those horses got there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was a very interesting presentation. I want to thank all our speakers today for being with us and sharing their experiences. The Jockey Club has been hosting this conference each summer for more than 70 years, and we try to pack into the 2+ hours a balance of topics we believe interesting and informative. We spent time discussing some hard truths about the pari-mutuel revenue sources that have always sustained us. We heard from a seasoned sports journalist that there is much more of our sport to promote, and we must be ready to build upon the foundation presented by HISA. We witnessed a valuable dialogue among the regulators and those who are regulated, proving that even in this era of hard and fast ideologies, there is nothing better than respectful discourse to solve problems and make progress. Finally, Mike Lopez, by way of Skidmore in the NFL, gave us his insights into how data can inform decisions on integrity, safety, and promotion. I'd like to take the final few minutes of today's program to talk a little bit about the future of the sport and what we firmly believe it can be. After a decade-long effort, and there were times when it felt much longer, HISA is the law of the land, and it's something we can build upon. 4 years ago, at this program, the great Australian breeder, owner John Massara, speaking about the proposed federal legislation, said, "You've got everything to unleash a monster of economic rewards. If you were to join the rest of the world in this harmonization in terms of the drug rules." John was right. and we are here today. And it's now time to capture that future. I have two suggestions. First, we have to embrace the international aspect of the sport. Racing is global, and thankfully in many parts of the world, the sport is thriving. The Breeders' Cup, one of the pioneers of international racing, now regularly hosts wagering from all over the globe, including the world-leading markets of Hong Kong and Japan. Breeders' Cup includes about 40 international challenge races, and over the past 3 years, 120 horses from overseas have competed, winning 17 of those races. The Hong Kong Jockey Club, in partnership with 5 other racing nations, in 2019 created the World Pool, a commingling pool that boasts deep liquidity. Growth in the World Pool has been impressive, with turnover increasing significantly each year. In Australia, in 2018, there were just 28 races worth $1 million or greater in Australian dollars. This year, there'll be 89, and returns to owners have grown 92% in the last decade. Even the small country of Bahrain just announced a purse increase to their $1 million Bahrain International Trophy, and it's recently attained Grade 2 status. Our domestic broadcast partners, TVG, NBC Sports, and Fox Sports, have increasingly featured major international race meets and carnivals. And there's no doubt that the U.S. bloodstock has a presence overseas. Europe's leading 2-year-old colt and filly are by a U.S. stallion, and that also happens to be Australia's leading freshman sire. This is really the tip of the iceberg, because we're now in line with the rest of the world with harmonizing medication rules. U.S. racing is poised to unleash that monster of economic rewards. One needs to look no further than the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, which now regularly stage league games in Europe and Central America. Soccer and Formula One racing are also highly international, with competitions spanning continents. According to some researchers, there's a case to be made that horse racing is the 3rd most global sport behind soccer and basketball. The top horse racing events around the world are just as glamorous as any events in sports. To thrive, U.S. racing needs to embrace those international markets. The second of my suggestions involves marketing of our sport. We need to get past the concerns that we are constantly in turmoil, rocking from one crisis to the next. Another roundtable speaker from the past, David Fuscus, discussed crisis management and said, if we come together as an industry, negative perception can be turned. There is hope we can come through these dark days. But to do so, the public needs to understand what we're doing and believe we are on a path to success. With HISA firmly established, we are on that path, and we need to aggressively begin to market to new and younger audience and defeat the extremist voices that threaten horse racing. Our best weapon is a fan base who trusts our sport. The Jockey Club's America's Best Racing has been hard at work building a fan base for more than a decade, and now has a regular social media audience of 400,000, 80% of which is under the age of 44. That is the demographic we need to influence the most. America's Best Racing has a proven formula, but it needs more resources beyond those underwritten by the Jockey Club. Today, we are calling on all corners of the sport to come together to fund a sustained campaign that uses digital media to convey the attractiveness of our sport to a trusting new generation of fans. More than a decade ago, when we first began to plan for what became HISA, not all of the organizations on the screen would have been with us. Now things have changed. We need to capitalize on that unity. Over the coming months, the team at America's Best Racing will be meeting with many of the leading organizations and individuals involved in the sport. It's time to come together and take the bold steps necessary to ensure our great sport's future. Thank you again for joining us here today, and we hope this has been a productive event for all of you.